Hello, and welcome to this episode of Marine Band Offstage. I'm your host, Staff Sergeant Connor Mikula. We all know the musicians of the President's Zone as talented, accomplished artists, but same as with every professional musician, they have a story from struggling with a B-flat concert scale as a beginner all the way to performing at the White House. So, once again, I sit down with two members of the band to hear their stories.
Hi, my name is First Lieutenant Toranzo, and I am the Assistant Director of the President's Zone United States Marine Band.
And your promotion to our new director was a recent one at the time of this recording, so congratulations, sir.
Thanks, Connor.
But that's at the end of our story today, so let's rewind a little bit. What was your early childhood like for you, and how did music fit into that?
Yeah, so I was born in Holguín, Cuba, and music was always around. I come from a Christian household, so both of my parents were active in the music ministry at church, and I was around that all the time at home, and watching them in rehearsals from a very early age. So music had always been in my surrounding. We immigrated to the U.S. in 2004. I was 8 years old at the time, and it was through the church. Church missionaries saw my parents singing in the church ministry and thought it would be a wonderful idea to bring them to the States, to Arizona specifically, to start a Spanish-speaking part of the church out there. And so years later, we immigrated to the U.S., and that's where, that's how I got here. So
music literally brought you to the United States.
That's correct,
in a way. Yeah. Wow. Oh, that's wonderful. So you had mentioned that you grew up with music, but you didn't always speak English. You had to learn English at a certain point, and music kind of played into that. So would you speak on that for a little bit?
Yeah, it's tough. I mean, from the standpoint of an 8-year-old coming into something completely new, culture, that includes language, foods even. I mean, I remember on the plane, in Cuba, we don't really have apples, and that was a nice little detail that I was looking forward to. I'm gonna get to try an apple for the first time. So the biggest challenge right off the bat was learning the English language, and still to this day, I sometimes struggle a little bit because I translate things in my head. I still say enero, febrero, marzo, abril when I'm trying to recite the months. And yeah, that was challenging, I think, for not only me, but my family members as well. But the cool thing about music, though, I mean, and I can speak to this more later on, but it is a universal language. And I eventually found that, using the horn was the perfect outlet for me to express the way that I wanted to communicate inside without using words.
And that kind of transcends the language barrier, like you said. So that's really, really beautiful. Do you remember any specific instances where maybe the language barrier failed you, but your music kind of filled in the gap for fitting in with a new group or talking to someone or communicating in a rehearsal or anything?
Yeah, that's perfect. The first, I guess my official education in music began as early as the 5th grade. In 5th grade, we had a recorder class, and I think a lot of us, if we started in elementary school, we probably started off with a recorder. And at the time, 3rd, 4th, 5th grade, that was the beginning of it all. So fitting into the band class and music class, toying around with the recorder was fun, and I wasn't really able to understand all the jokes that people would make, or comments, or understand the teacher at times. But when it came to seeing the teacher press down on the holes of the recorder and make these funny sounds, it It was something that kind of started to erase some of those barriers for me.
As someone who moved from Cuba to the United States at a very young age, I'm sure there were a lot of maybe hardships or issues with that besides just the language barrier. What was your childhood like for you growing up in the United States once you had moved there?
Yeah, so life in Arizona was a little bit tough. That's how we ended up in Miami. Miami is a melting pot of different, predominantly Hispanic cultures from all over. Finding a job, my parents trying to find a job was especially difficult. So my father worked at McDonald's for over 12 years. At the same time, my mom was working a laundromat. Later on, she sort of found a calling to get into the medical world and became a nursing assistant and things like those. But that didn't happen until way later. So it was very difficult to make ends meet. And it was a constant struggle to do the fun field trips at school, because that directly translated into being able to afford these things. But through it all, music was always present. It was always part of the equation. I'll be fully transparent here, but there were times where, my parents couldn't afford the electric bill, and, unfortunately, we'd be struggling with that a bit. Same thing with, running water. Those things, though, from that early age, kind of started to build this perspective that I still carry deeply within me to this day. And so I find that those struggles, they were difficult, of course, but at the end of the day, they definitely made me stronger. And I'm so grateful for the church my parents called home in Miami when we moved out there, because there was a food pantry. The facilities at church were there when we needed it. And not a lot of people really know. It's, for some folks that can be kind of embarrassing. But I feel so open, so willing to share this, because I know that a lot of people face those hardships growing up or currently, and it's very real. And when you're living in the moment, it can seem very scary and alone. But again, going back to the music point, I mean, music didn't make me feel alone. Music was my friend, and for my family as well.
Well, I think this is an extremely important perspective to share, and I very much appreciate your candidness when it comes to this, because it's also likely a much more common perspective than people know. So it's really important to hear this, and through all of this, like you said, music was kind of this underlying current. So how did music factor into that? Was it sort of an outlet, distraction, or just something that made you feel welcome?
Yeah, all of the above. Distraction, I would say, comes to mind off the bat when I was really starting to learn how to play an instrument, the horn in particular. Mm-hmm. When you have all these negative things going, adversities that you face, hurdles, challenge, whatever the case might be, everybody has an outlet that they go to kind of decompress, distract them from that particular thing. Some people love to go to the gym to blow off some steam. Other people like to go running outdoors, be in nature. For me, it was, I'm learning this other thing with other people that shared that same interest, and I felt welcomed. So that's the second thing you touched upon. It's a very welcoming environment. You can make mistakes without feeling judged, but at the same time, you're having fun. And so those three things, distracted me from all of those other things that were going on in my life at the time.
Right. And it sounds like it had a profound impact on you and your story, and you were inspired to seek a career in music. But uh, while some musicians would be applying to conservatories, your career started a little less traditionally. How did your career in music get started?
Yeah, so I always say this, the Marine Band in particular, I've been following the Marine Band for a long time. I first heard the Marine Band when I think it was middle school. It had to be middle school, really. And later on, I remember watching the videos on YouTube of retired Colonel Colburn conducting the Marine Band through some of Sousa's most beloved marches. And I was like, wow, that's really cool. I don't think I'd ever be able to do that, but it's just really awesome seeing these men and women do that so well. And so when it came time for me to graduate high school, I was looking at my dream was to become a professional horn player. I didn't know how exactly. I had a goal of attending Florida State University with Michelle Stapleton.
Go Seminoles.
Yeah. And, that sort of idea, I want to attend FSU, I want to be a professional horn player, came about during the Tri-State music festivals that happen at FSU. And I remember 10th and 11th grade, I was part of that. And I was like, yeah, this is it. I want to do this. And when it came down to graduation, it wasn't possible. It was off the tables. I couldn't go to college right off the bat, which was fine. I was a little bit disappointed, but I thought that one day I would be able to do something like that. My friend Ernesto, who was also in the band, he played the trumpet. And Ernesto, if you're listening to this, hi. Ernesto opened my eyes to the Marine Corps MEOP, the Music Enlistment Option Program. And he was going through the process of becoming a Marine and taking the audition. And I found that to be interesting. And I gave it a shot. So I went over to the recruiting station with him, and the recruiters kind of sort of walked me through the whole thing. And they're like, yeah, this is something that, you could do and go into the president's zone and yada, yada, yada. And I was like, whoa, so this is something that's totally doable and I can go into the president's zone. So I had that idea in my head. And I can say that, yeah, there is a path into the president's zone, but maybe not so direct, perhaps. I think joining the Fleet Music program that we have was probably the best decision that I've ever made. Looking back at 10 years that I've been in the Marine Corps, I don't have any regrets. And so that's kind of how I landed into the Marine Corps, and here I am today.
And something that I wish more people were aware of is just how many musical opportunities there are within the military at large.
Oh, yeah.
Over 100 different musical groups between the fleet bands, field bands, premier bands, and more. How did your experience in specifically the fleet band shape you, and how does it compare to your experience so far here at the President's Own?
Yeah, being a Marine is awesome. And, it's something that nobody can take away from you. Being in the Marine Corps is really the only thing that I know. And I say that from the standpoint of I joined when I was 18, 19 years old. And I learned to be an adult through the Marine Corps. And the Marine Corps has, along the way provided me with mentorship and, you can do this. You can overcome any obstacle if you have the right mindset and the warrior ethos and it's never given. It's always earned. it's a motto that has stuck with me for a long time. And I've done some really cool things throughout my 10 years. In the fleet, we call the fleet, our sister bands. We do rotate every 3 years, so you get to work with a plethora of people. And every time you showed up to a new unit, you sort of start from scratch. But I mean that from the standpoint of you're learning new people, you're making new friends along the way, you gain new mentors, you make these connections along the way that are irreplaceable, frankly. And it's just been a wonderful experience. I remember this was during COVID, coming out of COVID. There was an initiative that I was part of at Fox Studios in Los Angeles, and we recorded the soundtrack to 2 different Marine Corps commercial soundtracks, and that was a hoot.
That sounds great. Yeah,
that was a blast, and that was another itch that I wanted to scratch for a long time. You listen to, I'm a horn player, so we love John Williams. We love these composers that really take advantage of what the horn has to offer. And movie music in particular is close to my heart as well. And so I thought that was one of the coolest things I've ever done, was being in Fox Studios with this really powerful brass section, just playing this wonderful music.
So after the Fleet Band, or rather towards the tail end of your Fleet Band career, in the middle of all of this, the COVID pandemic struck. And so I understand it had a large impact not only on your career, but you and your family. Would you mind speaking a little bit to that?
Yeah, so COVID was tough for everyone. COVID was a time where everything stopped. Everything came to a halt. And it was a time that really impacted my family because I lost my father during that time to COVID. And my father was a huge role model for me, mentor, and always wanted the best for our family, always certainly wanted the best for me, being the oldest. He kind of wanted me to make a name for myself, for to help out the family when one day he wouldn't be there. And this was especially tough too. I was in California at the time, and he was living in Miami during the middle of a pandemic. We couldn't really travel. Anyways, I ended up being able to go to Miami during that time, and I wasn't able to go into the hospital to see him, which was really tough, And then I went back to California after 12 or 13 days or so, something like that. And he eventually passed away, and I never got to see him. And, that hurts still to this day. But, and I say this because when that happened, everything kind of became stale. The drive that I had about the drive for music and everything just kind of, and I think everybody was feeling it. And then I was, okay, what do I do? I'm approaching almost 10 years in the Marine Corps. Do I want to do this for another 10 years? Do I want to exit and perhaps seek another career, seek music education? How do we come out of this? And so shortly after that, I ended up moving to the School of Music in Virginia Beach to become the horn instructor. And that's where I was right before coming here. And right at the tail end of what it seemed like was going to be the end of my career, this opportunity came about to, just put my name in the hat, to have some feedback. That's the way that I viewed this audition.
Yeah.
Why not? And I'm glad I did. And and I don't have any regrets.
Well, of course. So, such a wonderful story coming into the President's Zone. Just incredibly inspiring, sir. I have to say, you have one of the least traditional stories leading up to the Marine Band I think I've heard, but it's one that I think everyone would benefit from hearing. Making opportunities when none were offered freely, preserving through the hardships that are outside of your control, all while fostering this love for music that eventually ended up in such a prestigious position. If you could give any advice to someone who might be in a similar position that you were in, maybe someone who feels that a career in music is off the table, what would that be?
I would say stay curious, number one. Work hard, work hard, and don't let, situations surrounding take control over your passions. Create opportunities for yourself, never stop learning and seeking advice. And, I always like to say, behind every musician, there are years. And I think we've all seen that picture of that iceberg. You only see the top of that, the tip of that iceberg. And the years, the hardship, the constant practicing, the playing this 4-bar phrase over and over until you get it right, that exists. And it's a very personal thing. And if we're not careful, we can easily let ourselves down. We can get disappointed in ourselves and be tough. But if you remain curious, if you work hard, if you create those opportunities for yourself and have an open mind, open heart, be humble, always be humble and treat people well, because music is of service. Music is both personal, of course, but it's also in service to other people. And so that's important to keep in mind.
Well, sir, we're very proud to have you here, and thank you for joining me today.
Thanks, Connor.
Hello, my name is Staff Sergeant Christina Hughes, and I'm a flutist with the Marine Band.
Hello, Christina. Thank you so much for joining me today. All right, let's just start right at the beginning. How did you originally get into music?
Sure. So both of my parents are actually professional musicians, and my dad says it's a curse. I have a very musical family. So it was a natural step for me to start an instrument. I tried violin first, and then I tried piano with my mom teaching me. That was a disaster. And then when I was 7, I guess I went to a flute and harp recital, and I loved that shiny instrument, and I wanted to play it, the flute.
And so you were probably exposed to a lot of music growing up. Like you said, both of your parents are professional musicians, but you also grew up just outside of New York City, right?
Yes.
So you were probably exposed to a lot of music from a very early age. Your parents, like you said, were both professional musicians, and you also grew up outside of New York City. So what kind of music were you exposed to when you were small?
So my dad is a professional French horn player, and I don't really remember, but he has told me that I would go with my mom to orchestra rehearsals and just sit in the audience quietly and color while they're playing and rehearsing. I remember falling asleep to people coming over to rehearse music with my mom and my dad many times, piano lessons that my mom was teaching at home, and really living close to New York City, there's just so many concerts to go to, seeing the Met Opera or New York Philharmonic, and there's just billions of concerts there. And then there also was great access to different programs for young musicians, like pre-college programs. I went to Manhattan School of Music Prep and also to Juilliard Pre-College.
Wow, that's all very impressive. I think I went and saw the Nutcracker once when I was in middle school, and that was kind of my early music exposure. So you were absolutely steeped in a ton of music. Was there a specific point that you decided you also wanted to be a professional musician, or did you just kind of always know?
I didn't always know. Growing up, I went to a music camp called Greenwood Music Camp. That's primarily chamber music and also a little bit of orchestra. They have a junior division that's 2 weeks, that's 10 to 14. And then a senior division that's 5 weeks, that's 14 to 18. And I actually went there from when I was 10 all the way through high school until I graduated high school. And I think that was really the first place that showed me that musicians can often be like an unconditional, accepting, loving group of people. So that was really important and special because I didn't always necessarily feel like I fit in at school. And so I made really some lifetime friendships there, and that really helped foster my love for music and know that it was more than just what you do in the practice room, that there can be passion and love behind it and friendships. And I think after going there, having such a great time, when I was applying to colleges, I did apply to regular universities in addition to music conservatories. And I considered doing a double degree because I was very serious academically.
And what? I'm just curious.
I mean, I thought maybe I would want to be a lawyer or major in political science. But I ultimately decided that if I was going to go to college for something, I didn't want to divide my time between academics and music anymore. I needed to just pick one. I did defer a year to Columbia, actually, but I went to New England Conservatory for undergrad and decided I should stay there.
Wow. So I think it's very sweet that the community of music kind of drew you in, and that was something that appealed to you. I remember in high school, pretty much all of my friends were in the marching band. That was sort of the community that I built. But it started for you with your parents, and what was it like wanting to make a living with music, but then also having parents that were both already professional musicians? Were there different expectations or standards with parents so in the know?
They were really involved sometimes with practicing, and I hated that because they would want to help me practice.
Right.
And they would insist I use the metronome, and I had to come around to that on my own.
Not the metronome, no.
They really always wanted to help me practice or remind me to, and I would get really mad. And so I had teachers that were like, she'll do it, just don't bother her. But then they would say, like, are you being productive today?
Oh, if it makes you feel any better, both of my parents were fairly ignorant of music as a whole, and they did the exact same thing. So it might just be a parent thing, not a musician thing.
Definitely. But at least at some point I did come around, and sometimes I would ask them for help practicing something that was maybe rhythmically challenging or new music, because I knew that they knew what they were doing. As
much as it may have annoyed you at times as we all grow up, it was probably nice to have this resource readily available to you.
Yes. And also, I think my dad, he freelanced for a long time in New York City before he got his teacher certification. And then he was actually my high school band director.
Oh.
So he kind of transitioned to that. He still plays in 2 different regional orchestras. But I think I learned from seeing my parents growing up that they were always just making things work, finding ways to play music and make it a living. And that sometimes means doing something that's not the traditional route, or taking on other kinds of jobs too.
I like that. So after your preparation in high school, you went on to music school, and I have to say, you have an impressive and almost intimidating list of schools and accomplishments here. Would you talk a little bit about the schools that you went to and what kinds of things you were doing while in college?
Sure. So I went to New England Conservatory for my bachelor's degree, and then I went to the Yale School of Music for my master's. And I did actually take a year off in between, which felt very monumental at the time, but looking back, it wasn't such a big deal, and I recommend it too.
Actually, would you talk about that gap year? What was the reason for that? I've seen a lot of people take a gap year between degrees, not take a gap year. So what was the reason for you?
So it really was that I didn't actually apply to a lot of grad schools when I was graduating with my bachelor's, and I didn't really get into the school I wanted to go to. So my dad was like, you don't have to go right now. It felt like I had to. It felt like everyone else that I went to school with was going right on to grad school. So it was hard at the time to separate and not put all this pressure on myself. But I was like, no, I should just try to take a year off. I got a job working at the Boston Symphony box office for a little bit. And then I also tried to start freelancing, and I was taking auditions, and I applied to grad school. And Yale is a great program. It's free tuition, which is really appealing if you are a musician, because those student loans, it might take a long time to pay back.
It's nice to have that support from your father saying that it was okay to take the gap year and to really find yourself. And obviously now we can sit here at the end of it and say, yeah, it was absolutely worth it, but it must have been scary in the moment.
Yeah, it definitely felt like I was in the minority, but I did meet a lot of other people or just friends who wished that they had taken a year off because they felt really burned out by the end of grad school.
So besides everything you do in college, music classes, performances, rehearsals, what else were you doing? Were you taking auditions? Were you doing other programs, maybe even festivals?
Yes, I did a few summer festivals when I was in school. I'd say the most notable ones were Aspen Music Festival, because I met a huge mentor of mine there, Mark Sparks, who was principal flute in St. Louis Symphony for a long time. And then I went to Tanglewood Music Festival, which was a dream. I'd always wanted to go there. And I auditioned many times, actually, to go before I finally got in. And I was rejected all the other times. I was never even waitlisted. But I think I auditioned 7 times before I got into Tanglewood.
Wow. So you were already doing all of these things while still going to school for music. And you mentioned that you missed a graduation ceremony for a gig at one point.
Yes. So my dad, I had been taking orchestra auditions too since my junior year of college. My dad was like, as soon as you start taking auditions, the better you'll know what works for you, what to expect. So you should just try one as soon as you can. My first audition was for Columbus Symphony, and it ended up going well. I was in the super finals for the second flute position there. And I think that kind of started encouraging me to play for people, try to send my resume to personnel managers and get some freelance work. So I did miss my NEC graduation for my first gig to play with Albany Symphony on a recording. So I think, I don't know. I think it was worth it. You go to school to get a job, so.
Right, already on that grind. So
yeah.
Speaking of grind and auditions, something that I wish more people knew about is what a lot of musicians call the audition circuit. Aspiring professionals will load themselves up with as many auditions as is possible and almost tour the country trying to get that dream orchestra job. Even for someone as talented and accomplished as yourself, it can be a grueling and frustrating process. So can you describe your time taking auditions and searching for your forever job?
Sure. Well, I think the first thing is when you're taking auditions, you're hoping that they can also be stepping stones if you win other jobs. So I think people don't necessarily think that the first audition that they win will be their job forever. Also, because orchestras, once they tenure a musician, that person can stay in the orchestra for the rest of their life until they retire, or if they decide to move on to another job. So for some positions like flute, there's so few in an orchestra, 3 or 4, that the auditions are few and far between. So when they do come up, you kind of have to go to see if you'll have any chance at all. So some people prefer to only take auditions for jobs that they really want. I'm not really of that. I don't subscribe to that mentality. I pretty much put myself out there for as many auditions as I could. I've definitely taken probably 50 or more.
Wow, goodness. So that can be very frustrating, not winning so many auditions, especially, I know you today, you're a world-class flute player. So
Thanks.
What kind of kept you going through that? What was your motivation to just keep going back, keep taking the auditions to know that there was going to be a job at the end of it?
I always knew that you just had to keep trying. It is like the Wayne Gretzky, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. So if you don't show up, you never give yourself a chance. And then the whole other thing is being able to take the auditions. It's a very specific thing that you do to yourself mentally and physically. So to know how to prepare, know what works for you the day of the audition, mental strength, visualizing, meditating, just routines that you need to be able to get used to. So when you go in there, you put yourself in the most optimal position to play as well as you can in that short time.
I think that that's something really important for people to understand about being a musician, whether they want to be a musician or they are and they're maybe a little frustrated. It's all musicians lose a lot. I have my fair share of competitions that I've lost. Saxophonists don't really have their own sort of audition circuit for the orchestra, but I can think of about several dozen NASA competitions, college concerto competitions that I definitely did not win. NASA, North American Saxophone Alliance, by the way. I got a confused look from Christina. But yeah, it's something to really know is that musicians lose a lot, even the successful ones. And so that's what I love so much about your story is, here you are in the President's Own, the United States Marine Band, and there was this whole process of losing and coming close and being frustrated that led up to that.
being able to persevere and keep going wasn't without lots of moments of doubt or sadness. And, it's very bittersweet and upsetting if you get so close. And I was runner-up for a lot of different positions. And like when I said that audition experiences are not necessarily a linear experience in how well you do every time, it's hard to count on being consistent because every audition is a different experience. If I hadn't received some form of validation in doing well in auditions, then I wouldn't have been as motivated to keep going either. So that it goes both ways. It's like through the validation of advancing in auditions and getting really close, in addition to musicians that I trusted, that I played for, and mentors who were telling me that I had to keep going, that I had something important to say. And then also having to work on believing in myself that I really did feel like I had something important to say and that I shouldn't stop. And the pandemic really also gave me a huge opportunity to stop and think about if I wanted to keep doing it. Because it felt too hard and I didn't know when I'd get to go back to work.
As if the audition circuit weren't a grind on its own. In the middle of all that, the COVID pandemic did strike. How did that affect your plans? What was your thought process? What did you go through during that?
Well, I mostly was afraid that musicians would never get to go back to work at all to play concerts for the public, because that was the earliest concern, because we had no idea what was going to happen or if there would be a way to solve it. And then I just knew, since I was freelancing a long time then, that I would be the last person to go back to work because they were doing smaller instrumentation for orchestra concerts. And of course, they'd only use their regular musicians. So why would they ever use an extra musician? So I just thought I had no idea when I would get to work again. And I did consider doing something else, but ultimately I thought there was no way I could do something else. And it would just feel like there was a huge part of my life missing.
Well, after all of that, there was a happy ending that we now have you in the Marine Band. Anyone that's heard you play immediately knows that you were just an astounding musician, and we're lucky that you're here.
Thank you.
You spent your whole life preparing to be in an orchestra, though, so I have to ask, you ended up playing in a band. How is that different for you, playing in a band rather than an orchestra?
So I feel like it really varies by section in this band. So the flute section is still a pretty small one, since there's only 5 flutists and 1 piccolo player. And then for band concerts, there will be 2, a principal, an assistant principal, and a second, and then a piccolo. So I feel like our roles are actually still a little bit more similar to what they are in an orchestral setting, especially during exposed parts of pieces, versus like if you look at the clarinet section, it can be like 4 to 6 on one part, and it feels a little bit more like a violin section in an orchestra, to make a comparison. But at the same time, there are lots of times where we're playing at the same time as other people and we're playing the same part. So it can feel like there's a little bit more coverage. Like if I play piccolo in the band, I don't feel as exposed sometimes. Whereas in orchestra, I feel very exposed on piccolo, and I'm very concerned about playing quietly. So I feel like those are the main differences, is just how many people playing your same melody or a line at the same time. But I think, and the volume, it's very loud.
The bands bands can be loud, yes.
But I feel like the challenge is, at least for me, I know what the different roles are for principal or for second or for piccolo. And while everyone has a different preference for what they like in a second flutist, I want to be the best second flutist that they would want. And I want to help them feel supported, or if we're playing the same thing in unison, to play perfectly under their sound. So it feels like I'm mostly trying to challenge myself also on a personal level to just fulfill the role as best as I can. So I can't say that there's too many differences between band and orchestra, but again, I think it's because of the section.
Something I wanted to touch on was you spent a lot of time not only auditioning, but being a freelance musician. And so that's a whole different web of complications, of things, of challenges, of a different skill set. Would you speak a little bit to what it's like being a freelance musician, and maybe some advice you would have for someone who's going through that right now or wants to someday?
Sure. So freelancing, a lot of it actually is knowing people and having rapport with people that play these positions in different places. So whether that means that you've gone to school with them, which I really looked at when I first moved to Houston and I didn't know anyone there. I had gone to grad school with the new principal flute in the Fort Worth Symphony. So he asked me to come sub a number of times because he trusted me and we had a great relationship. He knew the kind of player that I was. He knows that I'm a reliable person. I will come prepared. I will come caring about doing a good job. I will be on time, not just on time, I'll be early, really early.
Well, early is on time.
Yes, early is on time and professional. So that really was a huge benefit to me, but I also didn't know anyone in Houston, so I made a point to go and play for the principal flutist in the Houston Symphony and the second flutist at the time and the associate principal and follow up with them. Sometimes that does mean taking a few lessons to develop that rapport. And this was right after grad school. So I feel like I didn't have as much of a professional reputation yet or a ton of experience yet. So it was really important to show them that I was interested in subbing. I did take a substitute flute audition for Houston Symphony. Some orchestras do that where they have substitute auditions and then they will call from that list. So I did benefit from that as well. A lot of the times subbing somewhere will also be that you have to come in and you have to save the day last minute. And I wouldn't recommend agreeing to do that unless you have a certain level of confidence that you're going to do a good job. If you're familiar with the repertoire, you have enough time to get there because while you are there to save the day, they'll probably remember how well you saved the day. And ideally, you just want to show them that you're a reliable professional and that you will be prepared and calm and a good colleague, a friendly person. People want to work with nice people.
Well, thank you so much for sharing your story with us today, Christina.
Thank you so much for having me.
This episode was written by Staff Sergeant Connor Mikula and produced and edited by Staff Sergeant Joe Cradler. Recorded in John Philip Sousa Band Hall at Marine Barracks, Washington, D.C.